Hello everyone, my name is Dalton Jenkins, and I'm going to be giving a lecture I've prepared, An Introduction to Invertebrates. So what are invertebrates? Invertebrates are animals that do not have backbones. The first invertebrates that we'll be taking a look at today are sponges. Sponges belong to the phylum Porifera. Sponges are sedentary and they are filter feeders. Sponges are a basal group to all animals. They have flagellated cells known as choanocytes that are very similar to choanoflagellates. Sponge bodies are arranged in two layers of cells separated by a gelatinous region known as the mesohyl. Sponges reproduce sexually and they are sequentially hermaphroditic, meaning that at some point in their life cycle they stop functioning as males sexually and transition to functioning as females sexually. Moving on to our next group of invertebrates, the cnidarians. Cnidarians are eumetazoans that diverged from the rest of the clade early on in their evolutionary history. Cnidarians follow a basic body plan that includes a gastrovascular cavity. However, there are two main variations on this body plan. There are cnidarians that take the form of polyps, which are typically sessile. They're cylindrical, and they live their lives attached to substrate with their mouths and tentacles extending upward, waiting to capture prey and force it into their gastrovascular cavities for digestion. Then there are the medusae. Medusae are motile, bell-shaped cnidarians that drift and swim freely through their environments with their mouths and tentacles dangling downwards. Cnidarians rely on their tentacles to facilitate feeding. Cnidarian tentacles have specialized cells known as cnidocytes. Those cells give cnidarians their name. These cells have specialized organelles called cnidae that burst forth with threads that either sting and penetrate or entangle the bodies of prey so that the cnidarian can feed on them. The next group we're going to talk about are the Lophotrochozoans. The clade Lophotrochozoa is named for two features that are found in some of its members, but the clade is defined by similarities in molecular data. These two features for which Lophotrochozoa gets its name are the lophophore, which are a ring of tentacles that aid in feeding in some species, and a developmental trochophore larva stage that is part of the life cycles of some species of Lophotrochozoans. One group of Lophotrochozoans that we're going to talk about are the flatworms. Now, flatworms are animals. Some are free-living and some are parasitic. They live in wet environments like the ocean. They can live in freshwater environments, or they can live in damp places on land. They have simple bodies that lack specialized structures for facilitating gas exchange and waste excretion. Instead, their body plan favored the increasing of surface area and having the body's cells in close contact with water, so that these processes can occur through diffusion across cell membranes instead. They do not have a circulatory system at all and instead rely on their branching gastrovascular cavity to deliver the nutrients to their cells. The next Lophotrochozoans we'll talk about are those belonging to the phylum Syndermata. The first group are the rotifers. Rotifers are a group of tiny animals, and like most bilaterians, they have an alimentary canal where digestion takes place. It's more complex than the gastrovascular cavities of, say, the cnidarians. The alimentary canal has two openings, a mouth and an anus. Rotifers get their name from the cilia that surround their mouths and facilitate feeding by drawing in water that contains microorganisms. Rotifers exhibit some very unusual reproductive methods. Many species of rotifers have persisted for millions of years without male individuals. Reproduce new all-female generations asexually from unfertilized eggs through a process known as parthenogenesis. It is believed that rotifers increase their genetic diversity by incorporating foreign DNA that is absorbed from their environments when rehydrating from periods of desiccation. And that's important because in a population that never reproduces sexually, genetic diversity would be an issue. The other group belonging to phylum Syndermata are the acanthocephalans, which are highly modified rotifers that derive nutrition as parasites of vertebrates. They reproduce sexually, and they need more than one host within their lifetime, an intermediate host and a final host. The next group of Lophotrochozoans are the ectoprocs and brachiopods. Both ectoprocs and brachiopods are groups of sessile bilaterian animals that use lophophores to feed and have body cavities classified as columns. Ectoprocs are sessile colonial bilaterians that resemble clumps of moss when you see them. They're protected by porous exoskeletons and they feed using lophophores. Ectoprocs can live in freshwater environments and marine environments, and inside of marine environments, they commonly function as reef builders. Brachiopods, they are also sessile bilaterians. Visually, they can resemble clams, and they live their lives attached to the bottom of the ocean, attached to some substrate, and they rely on lophophores to feed as well. The next group of Lophotrochozoans are the mollusks. Mollusks are a group of soft-bodied animals belonging to the second most diverse phylum of animals, Mollusca. Although mollusks are soft-bodied, many of them create shells to protect themselves by secreting calcium carbonate, which hardens around them. The majority of mollusks are marine, but some species live in freshwater habitats, and even fewer are terrestrial. Mollusks have similar body plans to one another. They all feature a hemocoel, and they have a reduced colon, a muscular foot for locomotion, a visceral mass which houses their internal organs, a mantle which covers the visceral mass, and is responsible for secreting the calcium carbonate that forms the shell in mollusks that have shells. They also have a mantle cavity and a radula, which is a strap-like organ that helps with feeding. There are several unique groups of mollusks. You have the chitons. Chitons are elliptic. They're oval-shaped. They're unsegmented mollusks, and they produce a shell that is comprised of 8 separate plates. Next we have the gastropods, which are the majority of mollusks belong to the group known as gastropods. They can live in freshwater or on land, but most of them are marine. And gastropods secrete a spiral-shaped shell, like, for example, the shell of a snail. Slugs, they do not have shells, and snails, which do have shells, are both gastropods. That creep along their environments and typically use their radula to eat plants and algae. However, some gastropods have evolved specialized radula for predation. Another group of mollusks are the bivalves. Bivalves include animals like oysters and clams and mussels. They belong to the clade Bivalvia. They are suspension-feeding mollusks that usually live sedentary lives but can move in some scenarios. They're characterized by a lack of a radula, and their shells are hinged. And the final group of mollusks we'll talk about are the cephalopods, which include octopi and squids and cuttlefish. They're mollusks that are characterized by being the only mollusks that feature a closed circulatory system. They have modified feet, which have become excurrent siphons that they can expel water out of. Squids use this to move very quickly. They have complex brains that work in tandem with impressive sensory systems. Mollusks feed using their tentacles to bring food close to their beaks, where they bite their prey and incapacitate them with poison saliva. And the final group of Lophotrochozoans we'll talk about are the annelids. Annelids get their name from annelida, which means little rings. Annelids are worms that are named for their segmented bodies resembling chains of rings fused together and are separated into 2 main groups. First of these groups is the Arantians, which are a group of annelids that are mostly mobile creatures. They derive their nutrition from grazing on algae or from the predation of other organisms. And we have sedentarians, which are typically less mobile than the Arantians. Sedentarians, they typically move slowly or not at all. Many of them are filter feeders. Our next group of invertebrates are the ecdysozoans. They're a group, they're put together based on molecular data, but they get their name from ecdysis, which is the process of molting. Ecdysozoans secrete a cuticle which protects them, but in order to grow, they must molt it ever so often and secrete a new, larger cuticle. There are two major phyla of ecdysozoans: the nematodes, which are also called roundworms. They're found in a wide range of habitats, and they exhibit an array of different ecological relationships. Some nematodes are important decomposers and recyclers. Some are predators of pesky creatures that inhibit the growth of crops, and some are dangerous, well-equipped parasites of plants and animals. The other group of ecdysozoans we'll talk about are the arthropods. Arthropods are animals that belong to the phylum Arthropoda, which is the most diverse and successful of all phyla comprised of animals. Arthropods are characterized by their rigid exoskeletons, their segmented bodies, and their limbs that feature joints for articulation. Arthropods feature an open circulatory system, which means that their bodily fluids are not contained within vessels and arteries, but instead are pumped into an open body cavity by the heart via small arteries, and then reabsorbed and transferred back to the heart by pores within the body cavity. Arthropods also typically have complex sensory systems. They have a variety of specialized structures that facilitate gas exchange. Arthropods are subcategorized into three major lineages. The chelicerates, they're named for the presence of chelicerae, which are feeding appendages that usually take the form of pincers and fangs. Other distinguishing features of chelicerates include their lack of antennae and their simple single-lensed eyes. And the majority of extant chelicerates, such as spiders and ticks, are now classified as arachnids because of their 4 pairs of walking legs, 1 pair of chelicerae for feeding, and 1 pair of sensory appendages known as pedipalps. The next group of arthropods we'll talk about are myriapods. Myriapods are arthropods belonging to the clade Myriapoda. This includes centipedes and millipedes, which are millipedes are thought to be among the earliest land animals. Centipedes are carnivorous myriapods that can be distinguished from millipedes by the fact that each body segment only has 1 pair of legs instead of 2. Centipedes have poisonous appendages on their frontmost segment that aid in incapacitating prey and aid in defense from predators. Millipedes are myriapods that have 2 pairs of legs per body segment and that feed on living or decaying plants. And the final group of arthropods to talk about are the pancrustaceans. Pancrustaceans are arthropods that belong to the clade Pancrustacea, which is a group that encompasses all crustaceans and insects, since it has been discovered that many crustaceans are more closely related to insects than they are to other crustaceans, which makes the group crustaceans a paraphyletic group. Let's talk about crustaceans first. They're a group of arthropods. They're found in a wide range of environments. They typically possess many pairs of specialized appendages. They're the only arthropods equipped with 2 pairs of sensory antennae. Additionally, unlike insects, crustaceans have walking appendages located behind their genitals, on their tail region. Crustaceans reproduce sexually, and they are typically not hermaphroditic. Last group of pancrustaceans, insects. Insects are 6-legged arthropods belonging to the clade Pancrustacea. They are by far the most diverse group of eukaryotes. They have existed for at least 415 million years, and many insects will undergo metamorphosis within their life cycle. This can be a complete metamorphosis from a larva stage to a juvenile stage, or an incomplete metamorphosis in which the young insects are in a nymph stage rather than a larval stage, and the nymph stage more closely resembles an adult of the same species than a larva would resemble an adult of its species. Most insects are not hermaphroditic and reproduce sexually. And insects play many important ecological roles as predators, pollinators, parasites, decomposers, carriers of pathogenic organisms, and food for other organisms. Finally, we have the echinoderms. Echinoderms are named for their spiny skins. They possess columns, and they have water vascular systems, which are hydraulic systems in which water pressure is used to move extensions known as tube feet. Echinoderms are not hermaphroditic, and they typically reproduce sexually by releasing their gametes into their aquatic environments. And there are 5 groups of extant echinoderms. First one being Asteroidea. This clade includes sea stars and sea daisies. So what are sea stars and sea daisies? Sea stars are echinoderms whose bodies consist of 5 arms, each housing tube feet that extend from a central disc-like structure in the middle, and they derive nutrition as predators of bivalves or as scavengers. Sea daisies, they are small, armless members of the clade Asteroidea. And they exist only on submerged wood and absorb nutrients across a bodily membrane. The next group of echinoderms we'll talk about is Ophiuroidea, which includes organisms like brittle stars, which are motile echinoderms that use their tube feet to fix themselves to substrates and that derive nutrition as suspension feeders, predators, or as scavengers. The clade Echinoidea consists of armless animals that move slowly using groups of tube feet, such as sand dollars or sea urchins. Now, sand dollars are flat creatures, whereas sea urchins are typically spherical and covered in spines that assist in locomotion or protection from predators. Crinoidea. This group includes filter feeders that have not changed much at all in their evolutionary histories, such as sea lilies, which are sessile, and feather stars, which creep around slowly using their arms. And the final group of echinoderms we'll talk about is Holothuriidea. Sea cucumbers belong to this group. They do not. That is all I have for this lecture. Thank you for listening.